The sun was just beginning its descent, painting the Nevada basin in bruised shades of copper and violet. Wind slid through the sagebrush like a whisper through a dying man's lips, lifting dust from the old wagon ruts along the silver trail. Out here, on the cracked crust of nowhere, hope didn't bloom, it bled, slow and silent. Beneath that raw sky, on the far fringe of a mining town called Mercy's Hollow, a figure moved with the quiet tread of someone used to being overlooked. His name was Jonah Cade. 17. Lean as a rail, eyes too old for his face, and hands rough from work no boy should ever know. Some thought he was half Comanche, others swore he was the ghost of a gambler shot dead in Tucson. The truth was simpler and crueler. Jonah was no one's son, no town's heir, and no man's property, though many had tried to make him all three. He came to Mercy's Hollow the winter before last, limping from a wagon wreck and carrying nothing but a ragged satchel and a name he didn't give easily. He worked odd jobs for bed and scraps, cleaning stables, hauling lumber, fixing boots. Always watching, always listening, and always silent when talk turned to lineage or loyalty. He had scars under his collar and a coldness in his gaze that told you, don't ask. By spring, Jonah had found a kind of rhythm. He swept up at the Black Mica Saloon most nights, a place that reeked of spilled whiskey, sour breath, and secrets no one dared name. The patrons there were mean or broken or both, and Jonah learned early that neither kindness nor truth bought much in a town like this. But if you watched long enough, who bet on what, who owed who smiled at the banker's daughter when the sheriff wasn't looking, well, then maybe you could buy something more valuable than friendship. Jonah didn't dream. He studied, observed the turn of cards, the tremble of a liar's hand, the ledger books left open after too much bourbon. He was quiet but not invisible. And he learned fast. They called him Fox Dust behind his back, said he was clever, but too dirty to matter. Let them talk. The fox doesn't argue with the hounds. It just finds a better path. One night, as the saloon pulsed with drunken hollers and piano music played too fast, Jonah slipped into the back room where Mr. Harrow, the owner, was negotiating with a man in a silver-tipped hat. Jonah wasn't supposed to be there, but someone had to fetch the whiskey, and he moved like smoke. They didn't see him. Or didn't care. Shut down the claim, but the vein ain't dry, Harrow was saying, voice low. Folks gave up too soon. I've got a buyer coming from Frisco, but if you want in, I want half, the silver-hatted man replied. 30%, and your boys stay out of town. 40, and you get to keep breathing. Jonah stood frozen, 1 foot in shadow, brain chewing on the words like a starving man on gristle. A mine, still rich, hidden in plain sight, buried under old paperwork and assumption. And now 2 jackals were slicing it between them. That night, after the saloon emptied and the piano went still, Jonah waited. Not to steal. Not yet. But to find the deed. He had seen the ledgers. Knew how Harrow hid things. And behind a false wall in the office safe, Jonah found it. A claim registered to a dead man. Land no one had touched in 5 years. And a map, scrawled in hurried ink, leading to a forgotten slope just past Cinder Ridge. Jonah didn't take it. He memorized it. Burned the lines into his mind. 3 weeks later, he forged the signature of the dead man and refiled the claim in Carson City under a fake name, Tomas Redbird. The clerk didn't blink. No one did. Another dusty lot changing hands. Nothing worth notice. But Jonah knew. And in a town like Mercy's Hollow, knowledge was fire. Dangerous in the wrong hands. Lethal in the right ones. With the few coins he had, saved from weeks of rigged card games and generous fools, Jonah bought picks, a mule, and 2 crates of dynamite. He set out before dawn, following the map he'd traced in his head. The land looked barren, but Jonah saw something others had missed. A strip of quartz exposed like bone through old soil, glittering faintly in the morning light. He dug. Alone. Slept beside the hole. Ate cold beans. Drank stream water. His hands blistered, then calloused. And when he hit silver, real and bright, he didn't shout. He sat down, staring at it as if it might vanish. This wasn't a dream. It was a pivot, a hinge in fate. He returned to town with dirt on his boots and silver dust under his nails. No one noticed. Not yet. But the fuse had been lit. Quiet as it was, the world had begun to change. Jonah Cade, orphan, nobody, fox dust, now held something everyone wanted, and no one believed he had. The sun in Mercy's Hollow didn't shine. It scalded. By midday, even the flies retreated. The streets baked in silence, punctuated only by the creak of signs swinging from rusted chains and the distant cough of coal wagons moving up toward the ridge. It was a town pretending to be asleep. But behind every curtain, every half-open saloon door, eyes watched. And lately, more of them were watching Jonah Cade. 3 weeks had passed since Jonah hit silver. He didn't celebrate. He didn't spend like a man who'd struck rich. That would have been suicide. Instead, he played the fool, just clever enough to win at cards, just poor enough to borrow whiskey on credit. A shadow of the boy they used to mock. But the people in Mercy's Hollow could smell change. And change made them hungry. Whispers stirred in the dust. About the boy with eyes like flint. The one who went off digging and came back without bruises or blisters. The one who suddenly started asking about equipment, lumber, or transport, all with the casual air of someone who didn't need to beg anymore. Then came the banker. Mr. Aldous Clay was not a man to trust nor a man to cross. His face looked carved from pig fat and old debt. His smile stretched too wide beneath eyes that never blinked enough. He found Jonah behind the stables one evening, pretending to fix a busted latch. "You've been asking questions," Clay said, voice soft like syrup poured over glass. "And I make it my business to notice boys who ask too many." Jonah didn't flinch. "I was looking to buy a few planks. For a shed." Seems a lot of folks are building sheds these days. Out near Cinder Ridge, I hear." Jonah's fingers tightened on the hammer, but he kept his voice flat. "You hear wrong." Clay chuckled, a sound like boots crushing beetles. "No, son. I hear everything exactly right." The offer came the next day, polite, on paper, and signed with a golden seal. Partnership with Clay Holdings, promising equipment, manpower, protection, in exchange for 70% of all or mind. Jonah read the contract once, then burned it in his stove. No one saw, but someone always heard. Within days, the threats began. At first, they were small. The mule disappeared. His tools were smashed. A dead snake left curled on his bedroll like a ribbon of warning. Jonah said nothing. He simply bought another mule, borrowed tools, and slept with a knife under his ribs. Then someone tried to bury him alive. It happened near dusk, in the narrow gully that led to the mine's entrance. Jonah was laying fresh timbers to reinforce a tunnel when the rocks above shifted. A deliberate trigger. He dove, rolled, and barely escaped before half the hillside came down. Dust choked the air for minutes. When it cleared, the gully was sealed tight. Someone had meant for him to stay down there. That night, he didn't return to town. Instead, he climbed the ridge and watched the saloon lights flicker from afar, eyes hard as cooled lead. Someone had shown their teeth. Now he knew the game wasn't cards anymore. It was war. The next morning, Jonah walked into the Black Micah saloon like nothing had happened. He nodded at the barkeep, dropped a coin, and took his usual seat by the piano. He was bleeding from one arm, but no one asked. Men bled all the time in Mercy's Hollow. A few minutes later, 2 men entered. One wore a deputy's badge. The other wore a grin too sharp to be real. Carson Bragg, one of Clay's hired blades. They didn't look at Jonah. Not at first. But they sat near him. Too near. "Funny thing," Bragg said loud enough for the room. "Someone was seen pokin' around old Dead Man's Ridge. Claim's been inactive for years. Funny how some folk forget what's off limits." The deputy spit tobacco into a rusty can. Real shame if someone got caught squatting on ghost land. Jonah sipped his drink. "Funny thing," he replied. "I heard old Dead Man's Ridge was refiled. Legal it. Clerk down in Carson signed off just last month." Bragg's grin faltered. Just a flicker. But Jonah saw it. The room went still. Even the piano man stopped playing. "You threatening me, boy?" Bragg asked. Jonah set his glass down. "No. Just remindin' you how paper works. And how fire spreads." Bragg stood, hand drifting near his belt. Jonah didn't move. He didn't blink. And in that moment, something changed. Not loud, not seen, but felt. The saloon understood. This wasn't just a boy anymore. This was a fuse with a name. They left. For now. Later that night, a note was slid under Jonah's door. No name. Just a warning scrawled in ink that looked too fresh to be just ink. They'll come for blood next. Not tricks. Not talk. Be ready. No signature. But Jonah thought he recognized the handwriting. Neat, small, careful, like a schoolgirl's. He remembered the mute girl at the horse station. Ren, they called her. She didn't speak, but she watched everyone, especially him. Maybe she saw something no one else did. Maybe she knew who would die next. Jonah folded the note and tucked it inside his boot. Then he loaded his revolver. He hadn't made it this far to crawl. The mine was giving now. Not a torrent, not a rush, but steady, like the first slow bleed from a fresh wound. Jonah worked it himself at first, cautious not to stir attention. But the silver he extracted was pure, enough to make whispers into wagers. And in Mercy's Hollow, wagers spread faster than wildfire in wind. He started paying cash, small amounts to small men. Men who needed coin more than pride. A crippled war vet with a strong back. A teen girl whose father drank through their food money. Jonah never asked for loyalty, just silence. He didn't want friends. He wanted function. By midsummer, the silver was being smelted in a hidden pit dug near the old streambed. The air there stank of sulfur and sweat. Jonah barely slept. His hands grew blistered again, his eyes rimmed in red. But he didn't stop. Not when the first raw ingot gleamed like frost on moonless stone. Not when the money started piling, slowly, secretly, beneath the floorboards of an old trapper's shack he'd claimed. But no success in Mercy's Hollow goes unnoticed for long. Clay's men circled like buzzards. They couldn't prove anything, not yet, but Jonah felt their stares wherever he walked. Every step in town was like dragging a bloody carcass through wolf country. The pressure didn't just come from outside. Inside, something in Jonah strained tighter each day. He hadn't expected it to work. Not this well. Not this fast. He'd planned to sell the silver rights, maybe skip town, vanish before Clay could sniff out his scheme. But now he had power. Not enough to rule, but enough to threaten. And power like that, it changes a man. Even one who's still just a boy in a dusty coat. His smile became thinner. His words more precise. He counted seconds between questions and answers in every conversation, calculating trust, risk, weakness. Even the saloon girls stopped flirting. There was something too quiet in him now. Something dangerous. Only one person didn't flinch when he passed. Ren. He first saw her again when she dropped a wrapped parcel of cornbread and jerky on his cabin doorstep. No note. Just the same careful, tight script from the warning weeks earlier. Eat. You're not made of stone. He didn't chase her. Just watched her walk away, slight, unhurried, her faded green dress flapping like a leaf barely holding on. She was younger than he'd guessed. Maybe 16. Maybe less. And silent, always silent. But there was something in her eyes, not pity, not fear, just knowing. That night, he left a silver dollar under the cloth. The next day, the food came again. This continued for a week. Bread, berries, sometimes coffee. Always wrapped, always wordless. Until one evening he caught her still there, hovering by the door as he came back from the ridge. Her eyes widened, but she didn't run. She held her ground like someone who'd already seen the worst life could give. Jonah raised a brow. You spying on me? She shook her head, barely. You work for Clay? Another shake. You know who tried to bury me? This time, no movement. Just a long look. Then she reached into her pocket and pulled out a folded piece of paper. She handed it to him, eyes steady. He opened it. It was a hand-drawn map, his own mine, marked in red. 3 trails circled in ink. Ambush points. Sight lines. You drew this? He asked. A nod. He stared at her a long time. Then opened the cabin door. Come in. Not safe standing out there. She hesitated. Then stepped through. The inside of the cabin was simple. Bedroll, a small stove, mining tools in the corner. A silver nugget sat on the shelf, gleaming. She touched nothing. Just stood there, eyes flicking to the scars on his arms, the dark circles under his eyes, the worn boots. "You're mute," he said matter of fact. "Always been." She nodded again. He poured water into a tin cup and handed it to her. "I don't trust anyone," he muttered. "But you saved me twice now. That means something." She drank, then pointed to a scar above his collarbone. Her eyes asked a question. "Man I worked for back in Amarillo," he said flatly. "Didn't like when I asked to be paid." Her fingers hovered over her throat, then shaped a word with her lips. "Mother? Gone. Father? Dead long before I could hate him proper." Her eyes didn't change, just stayed still, listening, seeing him clearer than anyone had in years. Later that week, when he woke from a nightmare, sweating, breath ragged, heart pounding like a drum in a gunfight, she was there, sitting on the porch, sharpening a knife in moonlight. She didn't speak. She didn't need to. Ren had become the only quiet in a world of noise. But the outside didn't stop pressing. The banker sent a new offer, half the profit, no questions asked. Jonah sent it back with a splatter of blood from a rabbit he'd skinned. Message received. Then came the sheriff. An old man with no teeth and a badge that hadn't meant anything in a decade. But he stood at Jonah's door, tipped his hat, and said, "Word is, you found something. And if you're smart, you'll pretend you didn't." Jonah stared at him a long time. "What if I ain't interested in pretending?" The sheriff sighed. "Then you best be ready for who's comin' next." He left a cigar on the railing. It smelled like old blood and pine. Jonah knew the town was sharpening its knives. Knew that Clay, or someone worse, would try again soon. But for the first time, he wasn't alone. That night, he found Ren mending a boot by lanternlight. "You know they'll try to kill me." She didn't look up. Just kept sewing. "You could leave. Run south. Find safety." She paused. Then pulled something from her pocket, a threadbare ribbon, the kind little girls wear before life teaches them not to be soft. She tied it around Jonah's wrist. A silent pact. Between broken people, in a broken world. He didn't know what it meant yet, but it burned warmer than fire. The first snow came early. Not a blizzard, just a quiet drift that powdered the scrub grass and softened the lines of the desert. The wind died down for the first time in weeks. The mountains, distant and blue as bruises, stood solemn under the pale sky. It was a season that didn't belong here, too cold for this land, too gentle for Mercy's Hollow. Jonah and Ren had retreated high into the ridge country, where the rocks turned red and the stars spilled like broken lanterns over the land. After the sheriff's warning, and the note left nailed to Jonah's cabin door, "Your luck's up, Fox." It had been time to vanish. Ren led the way. She knew the hills better than he did, knew the deer paths and the rock shelves where rain pooled and predators slept. She guided him without a word, just the subtle tilt of her head or the sweep of her arm. They made camp in an old trapper's cabin, roof half-caved, moss in the corners, and together, they made it livable. She patched the roof with pine bark and wool. He sealed the chimney with stones and tar. She built traps and caught rabbits. He skinned and salted the meat. They moved like two hands of the same clock, separate but synced, turning always forward. Jonah didn't talk much. The silence wasn't awkward. It was the kind that wrapped around them like a blanket. Ren didn't demand stories, and he didn't offer any. But when she sat close by the fire, her presence steady, her eyes always watching, he felt something ease inside him. Something he hadn't known was tight. One night, as the snow hissed softly on the roof, Jonah found her sitting cross-legged, polishing a broken horseshoe. Not for use, just the shape, the curve of it worn smooth by time. She held it like it meant something. He poured her a tin cup of coffee, bitter and thin, but warm, sat across from her and said, "You ever think about leaving?" She didn't answer with signs. Just stared at the fire. "I used to. Before all this. Thought maybe I'd make it to San Francisco. Or down to the border, maybe cross into Mexico. Start new. Still nothing. I think I stayed because I liked proving people wrong. Showing them I could make something from nothing." Ren looked at him then, really looked, and reached into her satchel. She pulled out an old handkerchief and unwrapped something inside it. A child's drawing. Faded charcoal lines on scrap paper. A cabin. 2 stick figures. A tree with stars above it. She pointed at the taller figure. Then at Jonah. He blinked. "That's me." A soft smile touched her mouth, small and uncertain. She pointed to the cabin in the drawing, then around at their own 4 walls. His throat tightened. "You dreamed this?" She nodded. It hit him then, quiet as dawn breaking, that she hadn't saved him because she pitied him. She hadn't helped because she needed something. Ren saw something no one else ever had. Not the gambler. Not the boy with a plan. She'd seen Jonah before he was anything. And she'd believed in that version. He swallowed hard. "I don't know what this is," he said. "But I know I'd die to protect it." She leaned forward and pressed something into his palm. A charm carved from wood, rough, with a figure of a fox and a flame. Her own handiwork. Jonah clutched it like it was gold. In the days that followed, they built new routines. Ren taught him how to set silent traps. He showed her how to load a revolver, how to disassemble it blindfolded. They didn't speak, but they laughed. Once, when he burned the beans. Once more when she startled him with a snowball while he was boiling water. They were fragments of people, mending. But Mercy's Hollow wasn't finished with them. One morning, Jonah found the snow near their cabin disturbed, faint boot prints, half melted. Someone had come close. Too close. That night, they put out the fire early. Slept with knives and pistols within reach. In the quiet dark, Jonah whispered, "I think they followed me." Ren touched his hand. No blame in her face. Just readiness. He'd brought danger to her door. But she stayed anyway. 2 days later, a hawk call echoed unnaturally across the ridge. Not a bird, a signal. Jonah grabbed his rifle, eyes scanning the treeline. Ren pointed north. They didn't run. They packed quick, took only what mattered, a day's food, the silver charm, a single nugget wrapped in cloth. They left the rest. It was already gone. They camped that night beside a frozen creek. Huddled close under a shared blanket, Jonah finally asked, "If I told you I never had anyone, not one person who looked at me and saw more than a trickster or a problem, would you believe me?" She pressed her head lightly against his shoulder. "That's what you are to me now," he said. "More." In the dark, she took his hand and moved his fingers over her lips. Then to her heart. Then to his. Her way of saying, "Me too." The next morning, a raven circled low. A sign. Trouble wasn't over. It was circling back, colder now, angrier, wearing the mask of justice or vengeance or greed. But for a moment, the world stood still. 2 survivors. 2 liars. 2 believers. Sitting in a quiet they had carved out for themselves, away from the fire and the fury. And beneath the frost, the fire still burned. The storm came in before dawn, not snow, but men. 6 riders, wrapped in dust-colored coats, faces covered with scarves like bandits who pretended to be law. They rode fast, mean and silent, up from Mercy's Hollow with one name on their lips and blood in their eyes. Jonah Cade. Ren saw them first, a flicker of motion against the pale hills while the wind howled through the canyons. She dropped the tin pan she was cleaning and ran inside, breath misting, hands shaking. Jonah was already up, pulling on his coat, loading rounds into the rifle he'd kept strapped beside the door. "How many?" he asked. She held up 6 fingers. Then 2. 8. Total. "Clay's finest," Jonah muttered. "Or what passes for it." Ren pointed to the woods. "No," he said. "Not this time. We don't run. They'll hunt us till one of us is in the ground. You want to go now." But she didn't move. Instead, she grabbed the rifle from the wall, the one he taught her to fire. She checked the chamber, then nodded. Her silence was louder than any war cry. By the time the riders reached the clearing, the fire in the cabin was already cold, the windows shuttered, the air still. Jonah and Ren waded up the ridge, behind a wall of rocks and a buried line of dynamite he'd planted weeks ago, in case he ever needed to disappear for good. The riders dismounted, spreading out. One called out, "Jonah Cade, you're wanted for fraud, theft of claim, attempted murder, and conspiracy. You come down now and maybe the girl walks. Ren flinched. Her eyes darted to him. Don't listen, Jonah whispered. They don't take prisoners. The wind moaned low, carrying the threat like a whisper through dead branches. Another man stepped forward, tall, with a gold ring glinting over his glove. Carson Bragg. His voice cut through the trees like a whip. You think you can hide up here forever? You think she'll be safe with you? She's just another excuse, Jonah. Another thing you'll get killed trying to protect. Jonah looked at Ren. Her jaw was set, eyes locked on the scope. No fear. Just fire. Then Bragg did the one thing Jonah hadn't expected. He pulled something from his coat, a thin scarf. Pale green. Frayed at the ends. Ren gasped, the first sound he'd ever heard from her throat, sharp and terrified. No, Jonah said under his breath. How did they? Bragg raised the scarf. Pretty thing, isn't it? Found it at the stables. That old horseman, he put up a fight. Shame really. Ren dropped her rifle. She stood up. Ren. Jonah hissed, reaching for her. But she was already moving. Down the slope, hands raised, lips trembling. No, stop, Ren, stop. Bragg grinned. She knows what mercy looks like. You ought to try it. Jonah stood slowly behind her, hands open. She's got nothing to do with this, he said. Let her go. Bragg shrugged. Then come with us. Walk down nice and slow. Hands where I can see 'em. Ren turned, eyes wild. Her mouth moved. Don't. Jonah nodded just once. I'll handle it. Then he reached inside his coat, not for his gun, not yet, but for the fuse. He struck it with a snap of flint. The line flared. Bragg's eyes widened. Wait! The ridge exploded. Fire. Earth raining down. Jonah grabbed Ren and pulled her behind the boulders. The world roared around them. Screams mixed with thunder. One man flew backward. Another staggered off with half his coat aflame. Jonah fired twice, taking down the third. But Bragg wasn't dead. He crawled through the smoke, blood streaking his face, eyes burning with hate. He rose with a pistol and aimed it straight at Ren. Jonah turned just in time to shield her. The shot rang out. His shoulder burned. He hit the snow hard. Ren screamed. Not with her voice, her whole body, her face, her fists pounding the frozen earth. Bragg limped closer. End of the game, boy. You played smart, but not smart enough. Ren stepped between them, holding Jonah's revolver with both hands. It shook, but she didn't. Bragg raised his hand. You ain't gonna do it, girl. That's not who you. She pulled the trigger. The shot hit him in the chest. Bragg dropped like a puppet cut loose, crumpling into the snow, blood blooming dark across his coat. Silence fell. Jonah coughed, groaning, clutching his shoulder. Ren dropped the gun, fell beside him, tore at his coat to see the wound. Not dead, he muttered. Not yet. She nodded quickly, pressing her scarf to the wound. Her hands were slick with his blood. Damn fools, he said through gritted teeth. We could have left. Could have started over. Ren looked down at him, tears freezing on her cheeks. Then, in the faintest whisper barely there, she said, No, not without you. He blinked. Her voice. Her first words. He laughed, breathless. Took a bullet to hear you speak? You've got cruel timing. She smiled, broken, tearful, fierce. By the time the sun broke through the clouds, 2 of Clay's men had run off. One lay moaning in the trees. Bragg was still. Gone. The rest were dead or dying. Jonah faded in and out. Ren dragged him, somehow, back into the ruined cabin. She stitched his shoulder with shaking fingers, fed him spoonfuls of broth when he could swallow again. She didn't sleep, didn't cry. And when Jonah finally opened his eyes 3 days later, the scarf, her green one, was wrapped around his arm. A promise, still warm, even in a world gone cold. The cabin never truly warmed after the fight. The hole in the roof was patched, the walls reinforced with scavenged logs and mud, but the cold had settled into the bones of the place. Jonah sat in a chair by the hearth, shoulder wrapped tight, face thinner now. The fever had broken, but the pain lingered like a second skin. Ren moved softly around him, silent as always, though her silence now felt different, not because she couldn't speak, but because words no longer needed saying. She spoke with her hands. The way she placed the scarf back on his arm each morning before he stirred, as if it might guard him from death itself. A month passed. Snow melted. The first birds returned. Jonah healed slowly, scars twisting like roots across his shoulder and chest. He worked with one hand, and Ren worked with both, building, mending, strengthening the place they had chosen to survive in. But Mercy's hollow hadn't disappeared. One day, word came by a trader passing north. Aldous Clay had been found dead in his office. Poison, or a knife, no one was sure. His holdings were collapsing. The mine contracts he'd stolen had been invalidated. And the sheriff? Gone. Packed up and vanished into the mountains, leaving the town lawless and bleeding. Reckon someone's comin' for the rest of it, the trader muttered, eyeing Jonah. Might be time to claim what's yours, boy. Jonah didn't answer. That night, as firelight danced across the stone walls, Ren pulled out the old child's drawing again. The one with the cabin, the stars, and two figures standing side by side. She looked at Jonah, then slowly added something to the sketch, a third figure, holding both their hands. He stared at it. A breath caught in his throat. She met his gaze, nervous, hopeful, unguarded. Jonah rose, walked to the shelf, and pulled down a box he hadn't opened since the day the dynamite blew. Inside were the silver ingots, a dozen of them, stacked and forgotten, covered in soot and dust. He stared at them a long time. Then, quietly, he said, "This is enough to buy a future." Ren came to stand beside him. "Not here," he added. "Not in Hollow." She nodded slowly. The next day, they packed what little they had. Blankets. Food. The old rifle. Ren tied the charm, the wooden fox with the flame, to her satchel. Jonah took the child's drawing and folded it into his coat. They didn't leave by the trail. They crossed the ridge behind the cabin, where no rider dared go, and followed the old game paths west. No wagon. No horses. Just the two of them and the silence between their footsteps. Days turned into a week. They passed burned-out farms, ghost towns, ruins of a world that had chewed and spat them out. But through it all, they stayed side by side. Somewhere past the Blue Range, they found a place where the hills opened wide and the grass returned. A creek bent in a horseshoe, and the trees whispered instead of groaned. They built a new cabin there, smaller, tighter, but warmer in spirit. Ren painted the windows blue. Jonah planted sage along the edge. And time passed. Years maybe. People came and went. Stories drifted through frontier towns about a young man and a silent woman who paid in silver and never looked back. Some said he was a killer. Others called her a witch with eyes that could see through lies. But they didn't care what stories were told. One autumn evening, long after the stars had returned to their rightful places, Jonah found himself sitting by the hearth again. His hair had silver in it now, though not from the mine. His hands bore new scars, and his eyes, always sharp, had softened at the edges. Ren sat beside him, knitting something small and green. The child, theirs, slept in a cradle carved by Jonah's own hand. A ribbon tied above the crib fluttered in the breeze. The same scarf that had once been wrapped around a dying man's arm. He looked at it now, as if remembering a life lived by another version of himself. Then he turned to Ren. "I made a promise," he said, voice low, steady. "Not to win. Not to conquer. Just to survive. With you." Ren looked up, eyes shining, and took his hand. Outside, a wind picked up, scattering leaves like old ghosts. The fire cracked. The baby stirred. And in that moment, with blood behind them, a child before them, and peace beside them, the Firelight Pact was fulfilled. Two broken souls who had never been chosen by the world, had chosen each other.